Welcome to Elevate 2024. I'm John Strano, and this session is integrating FedEx shipping with REST, JSON, and OAuth. I'm the sole author of this content, and Appian makes no warranty of any kind, either express or implied, including but not limited to the implied warranties of merchantability, fitness for a particular purpose, or non-infringement. Appian assumes no responsibility for errors or omissions, which are solely mine. So the agenda for this session is that we'll talk about first the FedEx developer portal, how to create your FedEx account for the developer, how to apply for bearer token access, and how to, when all is said and done, when your release candidate is ready to go into production, how to apply to FedEx for approval of that account from sandbox to production. We'll talk about the REST API interaction with FedEx's Shipment API specifically. We'll look at the REST client system class, the web service call or operation to get the bearer token using the OAuth client, how to call the create shipment web service operation, and then we'll move on to the specific and drill down to the JSON interactions, how to generate your JSON request body to send off to that web service operation, and then once the response comes back, how to parse that JSON, including the payload that comes back as an encoded string, which will convert to a PDF file. Yeah, I'm John Strano, and I've been around PowerBuilder for a little while. I have been a developer, an instructor, and a technology evangelist, so-called, really a glorified pre-sales software engineer, and I've been around PowerBuilder since 1.0b. And yes, I'm a charter member, an original member of Team PowerSoft, Team Sybase. I'm a member of the Intertech Consulting team. Intertech is the oldest and largest consulting firm specializing in PowerBuilder tech in North America. We focus on architecture, consulting, education, programming, project management. Give us a call. First, let's look at the FedEx developer portal. You'll go to developer.fedex.com. You'll create your organization. You'll create your first API project. And once you've created that project, you'll be able to get your credentials from FedEx. And fast forward to the end of your development cycle, at least your first one, and you are ready to move to production. You'll then submit, among other things, your FedEx label. They'll take a look at it, and if they approve, you'll then get your credentials for production, as opposed to having first gotten the ability to interact with their sandbox. Love this sandbox. It gave me a nice, safe feeling once I was going through my iterative development process. And let's look at an excerpt from the INI file from the application. It does reflect what the process had been. First, we have our test values for the client ID, the client secret, and our FedEx account number, and our default shipping service. And then I found that it was really useful to be able to implement some sort of sleep delay after requesting the bearer token and before the first post request was made. And here are the endpoints for requesting that bearer token. And then once again, you get approval from FedEx to move to production, you'll get a second set of client ID, client secret, and FedEx account number, and two different endpoints to be able to get the bearer token and the shipment request. And back at the developer portal, we see the create shipment API description. It is a post operation, and we see here at the top of this particular heading, there's a link to the API authorization docs to show you how to apply for the ability to get those bearer tokens. Here's the header parameters at the top. Do note that the authorization header needs to be prefixed with the word bearer, then a space, and then you will concatenate in the actual bearer token value. And if you wish to be able to browse the Shipment API offline, you can download the collection and the full schema if you wish. And here's the request body. This will let you know what elements that FedEx requires for you to be able to post that create shipment operation. And here are the potential return values. Conventionally, yes, it will return a value of 200 for success. But here are the other values and what they mean. And your code can accommodate all of these values, of course. I would encourage you to consider using some test harness, whether it be Postman or SOAP UI or something else. Highly useful for prototyping as well as debugging outside of the PowerBuilder development environment. Here we see a screenshot for Postman. Here are the headers. Note the headers tab page here, as well as the body tab page. Take special note of the authorization header, prefixed with the word bearer and a space, and then you'll paste in the actual bearer token at runtime, which you can get from a request elsewhere here in Postman to be able to derive that string and then, yes, paste it in here for each of these test runs. And here is the body tab page within Postman. Here is the JSON text that I had my PowerBuilder code be able to create at first and then be able to test this data within the test harness. Very, very useful. Now, I chose to wrap every single FedEx interaction task that needed to be accomplished in a single non-visual user object. We see here end FedEx API. What I wanted to do was to preserve the capability of reuse here, of portability. So call it what you will, a factory, a toolbox, a wrapper. It allowed me to be able to define things like decoding and saving the shipment label that started off as a string that was decoded, then saved as a PDF file, to be able to get the bearer token. And this was borne out. The first project did succeed and was fairly popular with that customer to the point where they asked for a second and then a third enhancement. And I'll touch on that a bit later. Highly recommend wrapping all of this into one particular component. So here is the top level entry point for being able to interact with FedEx to be able to create these shipments. What we see here are two arguments. The first one is the request parameters that FedEx requires. And then I chose, rather than a structure, for various reasons, I chose to have a non-visual user object acting as a structure to be able to be the reference variable for the return values from the FedEx web service operation. So we see here that OAuth create shipment method. The first thing that we needed to accomplish was to be able to generate the ship request body. We'll delve into this particular method in detail in just a bit. The second task was to then get the bearer token, number 2 here. And then number 3, we wanted to send the ship request. And notice that there's no real, JSON or REST client here yet. This is the top level for each of these tasks. And task number 4 was to be able to get all those values back from a successful post to the FedEx web service operation. And so I then, number 4, parsed and extracted all the shipment values. Let's look at what it took now to generate the JSON that ended up being the request body for the FedEx create shipment web service operation. We see here in the signature that I'm passing in a structure that has all the FedEx ship request parameters that are required, as well as getting the request body string out of the method by reference here in the AS generated request body. We see the first thing that I did was to be able to create an instance of the JSON generator. And then I called the create JSON object. So now we've got our root object for that JSON document. And then I'm going to add the item object account number and then add a string value to it. And then I'm going to add an item string of the label response options. And then I'm going to add an additional object to the root called requested shipment. And then I'm going to add an item object called shipper. And then another item contact. And to the contact, I will add a person name, a phone number, as well as a company name. Oh, by the way, FedEx requires that the company name string be no longer than 35 characters, so I did have to constrain it here. And then we go through, we added an item of type array and added those values as strings to them. Then we added another item array of recipients and added items to them, and then created that contact item and added person name, phone number, and then company name. Added additional item array, and etc., etc. Let's move on. And then more string values being added to items here, recipient address, adding postal code, country code, etc. And to the shipment, we're adding the date, time stamp, etc. And you can see that this is just an elaborate detail. But at the bottom of it, at the end of it all, I called the getJSON string from the generator, and this local string was the generated request body. And just because the way I like to debug and develop, I had an interim local string variable so I could look at it in the debugger. And then I return it, well, assign it to the reference variable. Let's see how we get the bearer token from FedEx using the OAuth client. Here I'm creating an instance of OAuth client, setting the header on the request object, and initializing the request object properties with the appropriate values. Here I'm also calling append param multiple times to be able to set those values appropriately. And then I'm calling access token to make that request. And here I'm checking to see if I'm getting a successful 200 value. And if I do, I'm going to get the access token by calling the getAccessToken method on the response object. Of special note, not only did I need to assign the value of the grant type property, as we see here, I also had to call the append param grant type, seemingly in a redundant fashion. Don't know why, but this knowledge was hard won, so I'm passing it on to you. And then, yes, if it's successful, then we get the access token, as we saw in the previous code excerpt. And then we get the status text, we get the token error, and then we get the response body. But to the point, our access token is in this local string variable, access token, the bearer, and we're passing it back out by reference with the argument bearer token. So let's look at how we send the shipment request to FedEx using the REST client. Here I'm getting the URL from the INI file for that endpoint to FedEx, and then I'm creating the REST client. And then I'm setting 4 request headers, including the bearer token. Note that I'm getting the bearer token from that other method, and then I'm prefixing it with the word bearer and a space. And then I send the post request using the REST client, submitting the endpoint URL and submitting the request body, and then getting back the string that is the shipment response from FedEx. And here I'm just passing back to the calling method the response status code and the response status text. Now, if there was a successful call to the create shipment web service operation from FedEx, it will return a JSON string, a JSON document. How do we get useful values out of that string? First, we will create an instance of JSON Parser. Then we'll load that JSON string into the parser. And then we'll call getItemByPath. We have a ship date stamp at a known path, a known location within that JSON string, that JSON document. And then we'll call getItemString on that item to get the value out. Then we'll do the same for the delivery date stamp, for the tracking number, and for the net FedEx charge, a little bit of a difference. Once we get that item at the known path, we'll call getItemNumber to get what FedEx has decided to charge us. And then perhaps what can be interpreted as the money shot, we'll get the string that is the encoded label. And then, in just a moment, we'll see how we actually do that. Then we decode that string into a blob, which we then save as a file. And now this next method, which I've named OAuth decode save ship label, has nothing to do with REST or with OAuth or with JSON, but it does put a period on the entire process. Successful FedEx shipment creation, which by this point you do have, FedEx will return the label as a string. You'll then use base64 decode to turn that string into a blob, which you will then write out to a PDF file using file write-x. And there it is. And in fact, now that you have that test label being successfully created, you can then submit it to FedEx. Up to this point, FedEx has only allowed you to be able to use the sandbox for your account. But once you send this sample label to them, they will review it, and then they will decide to promote your particular account from sandbox to production. And since this particular integration, this particular solution only needed read-only and print capability for the PDF, I like to use the web browser control. So that was good enough and served us well. Now let's take a brief token tour of the user experience, the GUI of this FedEx integration. So FedEx has so many more shipment types than are displayed here, but this is the subset that this customer wanted to offer to its users. And once the shipment was successfully created, we just displayed confirmation to the user that the recipient was registered, what type of service it was, the tracking number, the ship date time, the expected delivery date time, and the FedEx charge. And then we displayed, of course, the label to them and enabled them to print that particular label to either plain paper or to a particular ZPL adhesive label printer. And a word about the portability that we sought to achieve. At the very top of this presentation, I said I wanted to create a single NVO that was FedEx factory, wrapper, toolbox, as it were. And here we see an overnight batch application being able to automatically create a roster of FedEx shipments. This was a huge time saver, not just for the developer, but more importantly for the users. Creating those FedEx shipments in a manual fashion, very, very time consuming before this integration was performed. And the third enhancement that was requested, we wanted to be able to put the ability to create FedEx shipments elsewhere in this particular solution, this enterprise, for sending records to ordering consoles and to opposing consoles. And we see here in the custodian page, tab page of the solution, we're able to put the create FedEx label and shipment capability wherever we pleased, wherever the customer pleased. And we come to the end of our session today. Do take advantage of the wealth of resources that are out there online for us all. Of special note, do take advantage of the boon that is the question and answer area of community.appian.com. Where better to find that future version of yourself? In other words, the issue that you're experiencing today, go out and find that person who solved that issue 6 months or 2 years ago. And thank you for your time and attention. And now to the Q&A portion of the session.